The heat struck me before the pain did a suffocating wall that wrapped around my skin as Harold Carter forced my arm against the glowing stove. His grip was merciless, one hand pressing down on my wrist, the other crushing the back of my neck until my body bent unwillingly toward the burner. The hiss that followed was not only sound but sensation, a scream of searing flesh that filled the kitchen and clawed into my nerves. My throat wanted to release a cry, but I ground my teeth so hard my jaw ached because weakness in front of him was victory for him, and I would not surrender that. His voice curled into my ear, low and venomous. "Obey me, or I will break you." The words were not shouted. They were whispered like a command drilled into a soldier, and they landed harder than the pain itself. My eyes watered, tears blurring the edge of my vision, yet I locked my gaze on his face. I wanted him to see defiance, not fear, because even if he scarred me, he would never own me. My heart pounded so loudly I could feel it in my temples, and the smell of my own burning skin twisted my stomach. My breath came in shallow gasps, my chest rising and falling with every ounce of discipline I could summon. I thought of every drill instructor who had told me to hold the line to endure to survive, and I clung to that training like a lifeline. For a moment, I wondered if this was the battle I had been unknowingly preparing for. Not the deployments overseas, not the nights in foreign barracks, but this kitchen in my mother's house, where the war was won against blood and bone. Harold's eyes bore into me, filled with triumph, and I hated him with a purity that shook me. I hated the way he had drained the light from my mother, the way he had molded his daughter into a mirror of his cruelty, the way he had turned a home into a battlefield. Every cell in me screamed to strike back, to drive my knee into him, to throw him against the counter to end his reign in one brutal act. Yet discipline held me still. Discipline kept me from collapsing, even as agony burned up my arm. Then something happened. His expression faltered. His grip, once iron, trembled. His breath hitched sharp and ragged. His lips parted, but no command came, no insult, no curse, only silence. He staggered back, clutching his chest, his face twisting in shock, as if his own body had betrayed him. His knees buckled, the sound of bone hitting tile echoing through the kitchen. My body jerked free, and I stumbled to the floor, my arm screaming with pain, the skin raw and blistering, but my eyes never left him. Harold Carter, the man who had spent years convincing everyone he was strong, unshakable, indestructible, was gasping like a fish pulled from water, his eyes wide with a fear I had never seen in him. A savage thought ripped through me before I could stop it. Let him die. Let him feel what helplessness tastes like. Let him choke on it the way he made us choke on silence. My breath caught my chest tight because I wanted it. I wanted that ending. Yet another voice rose inside me, the soldier's voice, the one that never left, no matter how many times I tried to come home. You do not abandon a man in crisis, even an enemy. You act, you stabilize, you keep breathing for him until help arrives. My body froze between two instincts, vengeance and duty, both pulling at me so hard I thought I would split in two. He slumped forward, his weight crashing against me, heavy and suffocating the same body that had pinned me to walls, now pinning me in desperation. His breath was shallow, his eyes rolling, his lips trembling with words that would never form. I could feel his heart hammering against my arm one moment and faltering the next. I pressed my free hand against him, not in comfort, but in reflex, because training had carved that movement into my bones. Pressure, stabilize, monitor. My stomach turned at my own betrayal, because why was I trying to keep him alive when every scar on me screamed to let him fall? I shouted for my mother, my voice raw and broken, the sound tearing down the hall. The silence that followed was unbearable. I was trapped in that kitchen, holding the man who had tried to destroy me. The stove still radiating heat behind me, my skin throbbing and the smell of burnt flesh hanging heavy in the air. The irony clawed at me. Minutes ago, he had ordered me to obey. Minutes ago, he had pressed me against fire, and now Here he was, broken in my arms, his life dripping out of him, one labored gasp at a time. My jaw clenched, my eyes burning with unshed tears. If he survived this moment, would he rise again to torture us, to demand obedience, to reclaim control? If he died, would my mother curse me? Forever would Madison paint me as the villain? Would the world ever know the truth of who he really was? The kitchen swam around me, shadows long and menacing, the weight of decision pressing down harder than his body ever had. My pulse roared in my ears, my burned arms screamed, and still I held him torn between saving and letting go. When footsteps finally rushed into the room, when my mother appeared with wide eyes and trembling hands, I knew the night was only beginning. Harold's body sagged in my grip, his breaths shallow, and in her face, I saw something that chilled me more than his cruelty ever had. I saw fear, the kind that knew the truth was about to explode. Before I go on, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from, because what happened after this moment would change everything I believed about family survival and the meaning of justice. I had not expected to come home like this carrying burns on my arm and the weight of a collapsing man, but my return to my hometown had been uneasy from the start. Just a week earlier, I had stepped off a bus wearing the uniform I had worn for nearly a decade. Boots, scuffed shoulders squared, and mind set on the idea of peace. After 2 long deployments and countless nights listening for sounds that meant danger, I wanted quiet. I wanted the comfort of the small town where I had once ridden my bike down long country roads and where porch lights glowed like safety signals at night. I wanted my mother Donna, who used to be my source of calm, who had always whispered prayers before bedtime and tucked blankets around me when storms rattled the windows. When I walked through the door that day, she greeted me with tears that slid quickly down her cheeks, her arms wrapping tight around me, her body shaking. For a moment, I thought nothing had changed, that I was her daughter first, that love still lived here. Her voice was warm. "You are home, Claire. You are home at last." That was the momentary rise, the little flicker of hope. Then, almost immediately, her eyes darted behind me as if checking for approval. Harold Carter stood in the hallway, broad heavyset, wearing the kind of pressed shirt that screamed control. He smiled at me, but it was not welcome. It was the kind of smile that masks possession. He extended a hand, and I shook it out of discipline, though every instinct told me to step back. "Welcome home, soldier," he said, his voice smooth, and then he added, "A soldier needs a roof, and every roof needs a man who knows how to keep order." On the surface, it was polite, almost generous, but I heard the undertone. It was not a greeting, it was a warning. Madison Carter appeared, then his daughter younger than me by 3 years, with sharp eyes and a smirk that told me she had already decided she did not want me here. She looked me up and down like I was a stranger intruding, not family. "You are just a guest," she said lightly, though there was steel under it. "This is not your house anymore." Her words pierced more deeply than she knew, because I had come back believing this was still mine, still the place where I belonged. That first night should have told me everything, but I convinced myself otherwise. My mother cooked dinner, fussing over plates, smiling nervously whenever Harold cleared his throat. The table was set with perfect precision forks and knives aligned like soldiers on parade. Harold sat at the head of the table as if he were a king, Donna at his side, Madison rolling her eyes when I spoke about life overseas. When Harold asked me about discipline in the military, I answered plainly, thinking he respected the topic. He nodded, tapping his glass, saying, "A family is like a unit. It works when the chain of command is clear. Everyone must know their place." My mother lowered her eyes quickly. Madison smirked again, and I realized his analogy was not admiration of service. It was justification for control. Still, I tried. I told myself that perhaps time had softened him, that perhaps my presence would remind him of respect. I wanted to believe we could mend broken parts of the family. Donna clung to me at night, whispering, "I am glad you are here." I thought it meant she would lean on me, that she wanted my strength. But the next morning, I caught her hiding receipts in the trash receipts Harold had demanded she never keep. She looked at me with fear, pressing a finger to her lips. "Do not tell him." It was not love that guided her, it was fear dressed as loyalty. Days passed and the air in the house thickened with unspoken rules. I noticed my mother never left the house alone. I noticed Madison's freedom was always encouraged, but mine was monitored. Harold watched everything from the way I stacked dishes to the way I answered questions. He spoke politely in public, shaking hands with neighbors, nodding like a respected man, but behind closed doors his gaze was heavy, measuring, reminding me this was his domain. There were moments fleeting and cruel when I thought he might actually be trying. One evening he poured me a drink, clinking his glass against mine, saying, "It is good to have a soldier in the house, someone who understands sacrifice." For a breath I thought he meant it, thought he valued me, but then he added, "Sacrifice means knowing when to follow." He watched me drink his words, sinking like hooks. The emotional rhythm of those days was a pendulum. One moment I felt hope when my mother slipped her hand into mine in the kitchen, whispering that she was proud of me, that I had become strong. The next moment she would pull away quickly when Harold walked in, her eyes darting to him like a frightened bird. One moment I thought Madison was softening when she asked me about my service, but then she laughed later, repeating my answers in mocking tones to her friends on the phone. I carried my duffel bag upstairs and unpacked in the room I had once called mine, the posters long gone, the walls painted over. On the dresser sat a small framed photo of my father, the man who had raised me before Harold arrived, his eyes kind, his smile real. I touched the glass, whispering, "I came back for her, Dad. I came back for us." That night, I lay awake, listening to footsteps in the hallway, heavy and deliberate, as if Harold wanted me to know he was there, patrolling, guarding nothing but his own power. My return home had been meant as a search for peace, but within days, I understood I had walked into another war. The front lines were the dinner table, the hallways, the silent glances between my mother and me. Harold Carter had built his kingdom here, and I was the unwelcome soldier who threatened to expose it. Yet still, I clung to the belief that maybe, just maybe, I could reclaim what was mine, that I could rebuild family where he had broken it. That fragile hope was the only light I carried into the darkness that was already waiting to swallow me whole. The first real clash came at dinner a few nights later. I had spent the day helping my mother in the kitchen, peeling potatoes, stirring soup, anything that felt normal, anything that reminded me of the girl I had been before the uniform and before Harold. For a few hours, the house smelled of spices and warmth, and I almost believed in the illusion, but illusions never lasted long here. Harold came home, his shoes clicking against the floor like a drumbeat, his eyes sweeping the room, inspecting, judging. He sat at the table without a word. Donna rushed to pour his drink, and Madison leaned on the chair beside him, smirking like she was part of his throne. The meal began quietly, but tension thickened with every clink of silverware. Harold asked about my plans now that I was back. His voice was casual, but I knew better. I told him I wanted to look for a job nearby, maybe help out at the local veterans center. Something meaningful. His brow furrowed, and he said in a tone sharp as a blade, "A house does not need two commanders. Your mother and I have things in order. You will find your place by listening, not leading." I set my fork down, my stomach twisting. I had faced commanding officers who barked louder than thunder, but none had made me feel as suffocated as Harold did with his calm authority. I answered carefully, "I respect order, Harold, but I also respect independence. I do not plan to sit quietly if something feels wrong." The room froze. Donna's eyes widened in panic. Madison's lips curled into a grin, and Harold's jaw tightened. Then it came, his hand striking my face so quickly I barely saw it. The sound echoed in the dining room, the sting spreading across my cheek. Donna gasped, her chair scraping back, and for a moment she rushed toward me, wrapping her arms around me like the mother I remembered. Her hands trembled as she whispered, "I am so sorry, Claire. I am so sorry." For an instant, I thought she meant it, thought she was breaking free. That was the rise, but it crashed just as quickly. Harold's glare turned to her, and she pulled back, releasing me as if my skin burned her. She shook her head, eyes filling with tears. "Do not fight him, Claire. You do not understand. He only wants what is best." Her words sliced deeper than his slap. Madison laughed, the sound cruel and sharp. She pulled out her phone, her fingers moving quickly, and I realized with horror she had recorded the entire moment. I reached out to stop her, but she danced back, grinning. "Already uploaded, sis. The world deserves to see the soldier who cannot even handle her own family." Her laughter filled the room as my cheeks burned not from Harold's strike, but from the humiliation. That night, I sat alone in my room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of Madison's giggles through the wall. My mother's muffled sobs floated from her bedroom, but she did not come to me. She did not stand beside me. The slap hurt less than her silence, less than her choice to shrink back into Harold's shadow. I pressed my fingers against the framed photo of my father on the dresser and whispered, "I am sorry, Dad. I do not know if I can save her." The days that followed carried the weight of invisible chains. Harold began setting rules for me as if I were a child. He told me when to leave the house, when to be back, how much money I should contribute. He demanded to see my bank account, arguing that family should not keep secrets. Donna nodded beside him, her voice thin. "He only wants to protect us." Madison smirked every time, delighting in my frustration. I tried small acts of resistance. I locked my bedroom door, but Harold took the knob off the next day, leaving the room exposed. I hid a portion of my stipend from the service in a small envelope, but Donna found it and handed it over to him, whispering, "You should not hide things from him." I helped her with groceries one morning, thinking maybe we could rebuild trust, but she flinched when Harold's car pulled into the driveway, rushing to put away the bags as if she were caught stealing. The worst part was the confusion, the rise and fall of false hope. Donna would hold my hand in the kitchen when Harold was out, her eyes pleading, "You are stronger than me. Claire, do not give up." My heart swelled at her words, believing she wanted to change. But the moment Harold entered the room, her hand slipped away and she lowered her eyes, siding with him, leaving me alone again. It was like drowning and catching brief gulps of air before being pushed back under. Madison grew bolder, taunting me in subtle ways. She wore my old jacket from high school, smirking when I noticed. She made snide comments about how soldiers only joined the army because they had no other choices, how I was too rigid to belong in normal life. She showed the video of Harold slapping me to her friends, laughing at the way I flinched, turning my humiliation into her entertainment. Each laugh was another knife, and though I wanted to retaliate, I held back because my instinct told me patience would matter more than anger. The conflict was not just about control, it was about erasure. Harold wanted to erase my independence. Donna seemed willing to erase her own strength to survive, and Madison wanted to erase my dignity for her amusement. Every day I stayed in that house, I felt myself shrinking, fighting to hold on to the discipline the military had drilled into me. Hold the line. Endure. Wait for the right moment. One evening, I overheard Harold on the phone in his office, his voice low but heated. He spoke about moving funds, about making sure Madison was secured, about my mother being too fragile to manage anything. The words were clipped, precise, dangerous. I pressed myself against the wall, my pulse racing, and I knew this was more than family tension. This was control tied to money, tied to power, tied to secrets that could ruin us all. When he hung up and walked out, he caught sight of me in the hallway. His eyes narrowed, and he said in a calm, measured tone, "A soldier should know better than to eavesdrop. Remember, Claire, this house runs on obedience, not curiosity." He walked past me, the faint smile on his lips telling me he knew exactly what he was doing and that he was daring me to fight him. That night, I could not sleep. I lay awake staring at the shadows shifting across the ceiling, my burned arm throbbing my cheek, still stinging from his earlier slap. My heart pounded with the truth that there was no going back to peace. The war had already begun, and the battlefield was not overseas, but here in my childhood home, where every moment was a battle between obedience and survival. The slap should have been the end of it, the warning that drew a line no one dared to cross again. But instead, it was only the beginning. Harold became bolder after that night, as though striking me had given him permission to tighten the ropes he already had around the house. He began to question everything I did, from the way I folded laundry to the hours I left the house. He wanted access to my phone, he wanted my passwords, and when I refused, he gave me that thin smile that carried more threat than words. Donna hovered behind him during those conversations, twisting her fingers together, glancing at me with pleading eyes, silently begging me to comply. The worst was when he demanded my military stipend. He sat at the kitchen table, hands folded like a banker, and told me it was only fair that all resources in the family be shared, that my income should strengthen the household. I told him calmly that the stipend was mine, earned through my service, and that I planned to use it to secure my future. His smile disappeared, and his fist struck the table so hard the dishes rattled. "This is my house," he said, his voice low but shaking with fury, "and everything in it belongs to me." My mother gasped, reaching for his arm, whispering, "Harold, please," but he yanked it away, his eyes burning into mine. I held my ground, but inside I felt the floor tilting beneath me. In the military, I had stood in front of men twice. My size had marched into situations where bullets cracked the air, but nothing made me tremble like his quiet threats. Because in combat, you knew who the enemy was. Here, he wore the face of family, and that made every word more poisonous. That evening, I found my mother sitting alone in her room, her head in her hands. She looked up when I entered, her eyes rimmed with red. "I am sorry, Claire," she whispered. "I should have stopped him, but you must not provoke him. He only wants control because he is afraid of losing us." Her words twisted inside me because they carried both truth and betrayal. Afraid of losing us. The man who struck us, who threatened us, was the one she still defended. I wanted to shake her, to scream that she was wrong, but I only held her trembling hands. "You do not need to live like this, Mom," I said softly. "You do not need to give him everything." She pulled her hands back quickly, shaking her head, her fear overwhelming whatever spark of courage my words might have lit. The cycle repeated, hope rising and falling like waves. She would show me brief moments of strength, then collapse into obedience. One morning, she made me coffee and whispered, "I am proud of you for standing up to him, Claire." For a heartbeat, I believed her, but that night when Harold accused me of hiding money, she looked at me and said, "Why would you make him angry like that? Why can you not just listen?" The betrayal stung worse than his blows. Madison played her part with relish. She paraded around in my old clothes, mocking me for being too rigid, too serious. She whispered lies about me to neighbors, painting me as unstable, someone broken by war. And then one evening, she cornered me in the hallway, her phone in hand, smirking as she waved it in front of me. "People love the video. She said they think it is hilarious that the big tough soldier cannot even stand up to her stepdad." She laughed as she walked away, and I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. It was in those nights of humiliation that I began planning. Quietly, secretly, I started gathering evidence. I placed my phone on record whenever Harold's voice rose, whenever threats laced his words. I hid a small camera in my room, angled toward the door, knowing that one day he might come storming in. I kept a journal too, not just for myself, but as a record, detailing every insult, every strike, every controlling command. If he ever tried to destroy me completely, I would not go down without proof of who he truly was. The first real moment of external hope came from Evelyn Brooks, the neighbor who lived 3 houses down. She was a widow, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, who had always been kind to me when I was a child. One afternoon as I walked past her garden, she called me over. Her voice was low but steady. "I hear too much from that house, Claire. I hear shouting, crying. Do not tell me nothing is wrong." I froze, my throat tightening. She stepped closer, resting a hand on my arm, her eyes full of understanding. "I lived through something similar years ago. If you need someone to stand with you, I will." Those words were a light in the darkness, a promise that I was not entirely alone. But light never lasted long. That evening, Harold struck my mother after she burned dinner, the sound sharp against the kitchen wall. I rushed in, grabbing his arm, shoving him back. He turned on me with fury, his face red, his breath hot. "You do not put your hands on me," he snarled. Before I could react, he grabbed a belt from the counter and whipped it across my back. The pain exploded, but I refused to scream. My mother fell to her knees, sobbing. "I am sorry." "Harold, please stop," while Madison stood in the doorway with a smile. I stumbled, but I did not fall. My eyes locked on him with fire. "You will not break me," I said, my voice shaking but firm. He swung again and again. I refused to collapse. Later that night, Donna crept into my room with a wet cloth for my wounds. She pressed it against my back, tears spilling whispering apologies. For a moment, I thought she was finally seeing clearly that she would take my side. She kissed my forehead and said, "You are strong, Claire, stronger than me. I will find a way to protect you." My chest filled with fragile hope. But the next morning, when Harold accused me of disrespect, she stood silently behind him, her eyes lowered, her mouth tight. And when he stormed out, she whispered, "You must learn to be quiet, Claire. You cannot fight him." That was the collapse again, the shattering of the little hope I carried. The tension grew unbearable every day, another battlefield. Harold demanded more, tested me more, as though he enjoyed the resistance. He followed me when I left the house, checked my belongings, cornered me in hallways with words that dripped with menace. Each encounter left me raw, but also sharper, more determined. My military training had taught me one lesson above all: patience was as powerful as strength. I would wait, I would gather, and when the moment came, I would strike with truth. And through it all, Evelyn's promise echoed in my mind. If you need someone to stand with you, I will. It reminded me that witnesses existed, that not everyone was blind. It reminded me that Harold could not silence every voice. The escalation of his cruelty only fueled my resolve. He believed obedience was inevitable, but he did not know that discipline could also mean resilience, and that one day soon, the war he had started inside our home would turn against him. The breaking point came on a night that smelled of smoke before smoke even touched the air. Harold had grown suspicious of me in the days after Evelyn offered her quiet support, as if he sensed that cracks were forming in the walls he had built. He began searching my room when I was out rifling through my drawers, moving things just slightly so I would notice. My phone disappeared for an hour and reappeared on the dresser, the battery drained, though I had left it full. His eyes followed me more closely than ever, and when I tried to keep distance, he cornered me with his questions, his voice deceptively calm. "Are you hiding something from me, Claire? Do you think you can outsmart me?" I denied it because the evidence I had gathered was hidden carefully, but I could tell he did not believe me. That evening he confronted me in the living room, his expression a mask of false calm. He held up my notebook, the one I used to write down memories of deployment, but lately I had begun adding notes about his outbursts. "Where did you get this habit?" he asked, his voice deceptively light, writing down secrets like some kind of spy. My stomach clenched as he flipped through the pages. He did not know yet that my recordings were on a hidden drive, but he had found enough to enrage him. My mother stood frozen in the doorway, whispering, "Harold, please let it go," but he ignored her. Madison watched from the stairs, her phone already in her hand, her smirk a blade cutting into me. Harold's voice dropped lower. "You think your uniform makes you untouchable, but under this roof, you are mine to command." The words ignited something inside me, not fear this time, but defiance. I looked straight at him and said, "I am not yours, and I never will be." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Then his face twisted and he lunged. His hand gripped my wrist iron strong, and he dragged me toward the kitchen. I struggled, my body tense, but he was fueled by rage and control. The sharp edge of the counter struck my hip as he shoved me forward. My mother cried out, running behind us, her voice high with panic, but she did not stop him. He slammed me against the stove, the burner already glowing red. The heat radiated against my skin before he even forced me closer. His grip tightened around the back of my neck, bending me down, his other hand pinning my arm. My body shook with the effort to resist, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst through my ribs. His voice hissed in my ear, low and venomous. "Obey me, or I will break you." The surface burned before contact, the air itself scorching, and then pain erupted as he pressed my arm against the hot metal. The hiss of flesh searing filled the kitchen. My vision blurred, my teeth clenched so hard I thought they might crack, but I refused to scream. My body trembled, my lungs gasped, but I locked my gaze on him. "I will not break," I whispered through gritted teeth, my voice shaking but unbroken. Donna sobbed, clawing at Harold's arm, but he shoved her back with one brutal movement. Madison laughed, the sound chilling her phone lifted as if she were recording again. The humiliation, the pain, the rage swirled into a storm inside me, but still, I held on. I thought of my training of nights on patrol when the world could end with one wrong step of the voices of commanders shouting, "Hold the line," and I held. Then it happened. Harold's grip faltered. His breath hitched sharp and shallow. His face, twisted in triumph a moment before now, twisted in something else entirely, something raw and terrifying. His eyes widened, his mouth opened as though to speak, but no words came. He clutched his chest, his body shuddering. The strength in his hands dissolved, and suddenly I was free. I stumbled back, clutching my arm, the smell of burnt skin filling my nostrils, and I watched as the man who had ruled this house with iron control staggered backward. His knees buckled, the heavy sound echoing against the tile. His body lurched, his breaths coming in gasps that rattled in his throat. For a heartbeat, the world froze. My mother's sobs, the only sound Madison's laughter cut off abruptly. Harold Carter, who had believed himself invincible, was crumbling right in front of us. I should have felt relief, maybe even justice, but instead, I felt a rush of confusion so strong it nearly toppled me. My instincts split in two. One side screamed, "Let him fall, let him feel the helplessness he had inflicted, let him pay." The other side, the soldier inside me, demanded action, demanded I do what I had been trained to do to preserve life, even when it belonged to someone I despised. My hands shook as I knelt beside him, torn between vengeance and duty. His body slumped against me, heavy and trembling, his head falling against my shoulder. His breaths were shallow, his chest rising in uneven bursts. My burned arm screamed with pain under his weight, yet I supported him without thinking. Donna dropped to the floor beside us, sobbing, her hands fluttering uselessly. "Harold, please stay with me," she cried, her tears wetting his shirt. Madison stood frozen now, her phone limp in her hand, her smirk gone, replaced with shock. I pressed my hand against Harold's chest, feeling the frantic rhythm of his heart falter beneath my palm. He looked at me, then his eyes wide, fear finally replacing the arrogance that had always filled them. I hated him in that moment more than ever, yet I also pitied him. He was just a man, fragile and mortal, and no amount of control could change that. The irony clawed at me. Minutes ago, he had ordered me to obey, had branded me with pain, and now he was powerless in my arms. My breath came fast, my thoughts tangled, but one thing was clear. Whatever came next, life in this house would never return to what it had been. When his body sagged further, his eyes rolling back, I shouted for my mother, my voice breaking. "Call for help now!" Donna scrambled her hands, fumbling for the phone, her voice shaking as she begged the dispatcher to send an ambulance. I held Harold tighter, the smell of burnt flesh mixing with the acrid tang of fear. My pulse hammered, my mind raced, and I knew this was not the end, only the spark that would set everything ablaze. The ambulance lights painted the street red and blue as they carried Harold away, his breaths shallow but still present, my mother clinging to his hand as though he were the only thing keeping her alive. I sat in the back of my brother's old car, clutching my burned arm, my skin wrapped in gauze that stung with every movement. The night air was heavy, pressing against me, and my thoughts ran wild. Part of me hoped Harold would never open his eyes again, that his reign would end with those gasping breaths. Another part, the soldier part, whispered that the real battle had only just begun, that he would wake, and when he did, he would return stronger and angrier. At the hospital, the hours dragged sterile light buzzing overhead, nurses rushing past, the faint smell of antiseptic filling every corner. Donna sat beside Harold's bed, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Madison hovered like a hawk, glaring at me whenever our eyes met, her phone clenched in her fist, though for once she did not dare record. I stayed in the corner silent, my burned arm throbbing under the dressing, my eyes fixed on the man who lay so still yet cast a shadow even unconscious. It was during those endless hours that I wandered down the hallway searching for a breath of space. I passed an open door, a chart left on a desk, and curiosity pulled me closer. The folder was marked with Harold's name. My hand shook as I opened it, scanning quickly. Medical history, past incidents, notations that chilled me. Hypertension, previous cardiac episodes, a note about an altercation years earlier, physical violence suspected. My stomach turned. He had been through this before, and Donna had known. She had lived with the knowledge that his violence was not new, that his health was fragile, and she had stayed anyway. When I returned to his room, Donna looked up at me, her eyes swollen from crying. She whispered, "He is not perfect, Claire, but he is your stepfather. He needs us." My jaw clenched, anger rising. "He does not need us," I said quietly. "He controls us. He destroys us." She shook her head fiercely, her voice trembling. "You do not understand him. He carries burdens. He wants to protect us in his way." I wanted to shout to shake her, but her tears stopped me. She had convinced herself of a lie so deeply that truth sounded like betrayal. The next day, while Donna went to the cafeteria and Madison stepped out to make a call, I searched Harold's belongings. His jacket hung on the back of the chair, his bag shoved under the bed. Inside, I found envelopes, folded papers, bank statements with numbers that made my heart pound. Transfers, large sums moved to an account in Madison's name. Assets stripped from Donna piece by piece. There were letters to legal documents suggesting prior investigations, complaints that had been closed without trial. The picture was clear. Harold was not just a tyrant in our home, he was a man covering tracks preparing for collapse by funneling everything to his daughter and leaving my mother with nothing. I stuffed the copies into my bag, my pulse hammering. Each paper was a weapon proof of what he truly was. But even as I held them, I knew it was dangerous. If he survived and discovered what I had, his wrath would burn hotter than the stove ever had. When I returned to the room, Donna was back, her face brightening for a moment as she looked at Harold, his chest rising faintly under the machines. She turned to me, her voice soft, pleading. "Please, Claire, do not dig into his past. He has his reasons. He wanted to protect us even if it does not look like it." Her words stabbed deeper than the pain in my arm. Protect us. The man who had burned me, who had struck her, who had humiliated me, was still her protector in her mind. My throat tightened as I whispered, "He is killing us, Mom." She looked away, tears sliding down her face, and said nothing more. That night, I sat by the hospital window watching the dark street below. A car idled for a long time, headlights dim, engine low. My chest tightened. It was the same car I had seen outside our house nights earlier, the one that had made me uneasy. Someone was watching, waiting, connected to Harold's secrets. I backed away from the glass, clutching the papers tighter. The danger was no longer confined to the walls of our house. It was spilling into the world beyond. Madison returned, her eyes sharp, her words sharper. "You think you are so clever snooping around," she hissed under her breath. "Dad will handle you when he is back on his feet." She smiled coldly, a promise more than a threat. I stared at her, my jaw tight. "Maybe he will not get back on his feet," I said, my voice calm, but edged with steel. She froze, then laughed, shaking her head. "You have no idea who you are dealing with." Later, when Harold stirred, his eyes flickering open for the first time, my breath caught. His gaze found mine instantly sharp, even through the fog of weakness. He did not speak, not yet, but his look said everything. He knew I was waiting, he knew I was armed with truth, and he hated me for it. I leaned closer, whispering so only he could hear. "You tried to break me, but I am still here." His lips curled faintly, his chest rising in a shallow laugh that ended in a cough. In that moment, I understood the truth more clearly than ever. He would never stop, not until I either surrendered or exposed him. My mother's pleas for silence, Madison's cruelty, his own threats, all of it was part of the same cage. And I could not stay caged any longer. The documents in my bag felt heavier than steel, heavier than any weapon I had carried in the military. They were proof of who Harold was, of what he had done. They were the beginning of a war, not just of fists and shouts, but of exposure, of stripping away the lies he had wrapped around himself for years. As I lay awake in the hospital chair, my burned arm throbbing, my mother crying softly in her sleep, and Madison scrolling her phone with venom in her eyes, I made a silent vow. I would not let him destroy us in silence. I would not let his secrets stay buried. And no matter what it cost, I would find a way to turn the truth into the weapon that would finally end his hold on us all. The hospital room was heavy with silence broken only by the beeping of machines and the shallow rasp of Harold's breathing. I sat upright in the chair, my back stiff, my burned arm throbbing beneath the dressing. Donna dozed fitfully beside the bed, her hand wrapped around his, whispering fragments of prayers in her sleep. Madison leaned against the window ledge, scrolling through her phone, the glow reflecting in her cold eyes. I kept my gaze fixed on Harold, watching, waiting, knowing that the moment he opened his eyes, the fragile calm would shatter. When it finally happened, it was like a spark in dry tinder. His lids fluttered, then opened fully, his eyes sharp and alive, searching the room until they found me. The air seemed to crackle. He did not speak right away, but the fury in his stare spoke volumes. He shifted slightly, wincing at the effort, then his lips parted and his voice emerged hoarse but venomous. "If you ever open your mouth about me, if you ever try to turn anyone against me, I will end you." The words slithered into the room low and threatening. Donna stirred, clutching his hand tighter, whispering, "Harold, please, rest. Do not upset yourself." But he ignored her, his gaze burning into mine. I leaned forward, my voice steady though my heart pounded. "You tried to destroy me already, and you failed." His lips curled into a faint smile. "Not yet," he rasped, "but I will." I slid my phone from my pocket beneath the edge of the chair, pressing record without a sound. Every word out of his mouth was evidence another nail in the coffin he had built for himself. He must have sensed something because his eyes narrowed. "You think you are clever, soldier, but you cannot fight me here. This is my world, not the battlefield you know." The tension thickened until Madison snapped it with her laughter. She set down her phone and stepped closer to the bed, her eyes gleaming. "Dad," she said, her voice loud enough to echo, "do not waste your strength with words. End her. She ruins everything." The words struck me like ice, not because they surprised me, but because they confirmed what I already knew. Madison was not just his daughter, she was his disciple. Donna gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Madison, stop," she whispered, but Madison only sneered. "You do not get it, Mom. She has been waiting to tear us apart. She came back to take over to turn you against Dad. You should have let her rot out there." Harold's chest heaved, his breath shallow, but his eyes alive with rage. He tried to push himself upright, veins standing out on his neck, his fingers clawing at the blanket. His gaze locked on me, and for a heartbeat I thought he would lunge across the bed. My pulse raced, my burned arm aching, but I did not move. I stared back at him unflinching. "If you think you can end me, then try," I whispered. With a guttural sound, he swung his legs over the side of the bed, his body trembling, his face red. Donna cried out, "Harold, no, please, you cannot!" But he shoved her hand away. Madison's eyes lit with cruel excitement. "Do it! Dad, show her who is in charge." He rose halfway before his body betrayed him. His breath hitched, his chest convulsed, and he staggered forward, his hand clutching at me for balance, but finding nothing. His eyes widened in shock, the fury draining, replaced by fear. His knees buckled, and he crashed to the floor with a sound that reverberated through the room. Donna screamed, dropping to her knees beside him, her hands fluttering uselessly. "Harold, stay with me, please stay." Madison froze, her bravado collapsing in an instant, her phone slipping from her hand onto the floor with a dull thud. I stood above him, my chest heaving. My phone, still recording my mind, caught between the chaos of the moment and the clarity of truth. This was not my doing. This was his body answering the years of cruelty he had inflicted. Harold's lips moved, a broken whisper escaping. "Obey." The word cracked unfinished, and then his body convulsed again. I knelt slowly, not to comfort, but to witness, pressing my hand against his chest. His heart fluttered wildly under my palm, then faltered. His eyes locked on mine, wide with panic. For the first time, he knew what it meant to be powerless, and I let him see the steel in my eyes. "You will never break me," I said quietly, my voice steady as his breaths rattled and slowed. Donna sobbed uncontrollably, her tears falling onto his shirt. Madison knelt too, shaking him, screaming, "Dad, no, you cannot leave me." But it was too late. His body sagged, his chest stilled, and the room filled with the sharp, unrelenting tone of the heart monitor. Nurses rushed in, pushing us aside, their voices urgent, but I knew. I knew before they said anything that Harold Carter's reign had ended on that sterile hospital floor. The room dissolved into chaos. Donna clung to the side of the bed as they lifted him back, her voice a wail that tore at the walls. Madison raged, shouting at the nurses, at me, at anyone who dared to look at her. "You killed him!" she screamed, pointing at me with trembling hands. "You wanted this!" My jaw clenched, but I said nothing. The recording in my pocket told the truth, and one day it would speak louder than her lies. When the doctors finally stepped back, when they pronounced the words that made it official, Donna collapsed into the chair, her face buried in her hands. Madison fled the room, her sobs echoing down the hallway. I remained where I was standing at the foot of the bed, staring at the man who had dominated every corner of our lives. In the end, it had not been my fists or my resistance that ended him. It had been his own heart collapsing under the weight of his rage. For a moment, I felt nothing, only emptiness. Then slowly something else rose. Not joy, not relief, but clarity. His death was not an end, it was a beginning. His secrets still lived in the papers in my bag, in the bruises on my skin, in the recordings on my phone. His legacy would not be silence. Donna looked up at me, then her eyes swollen and broken. "You should not have pushed him," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He only wanted control." My throat tightened, anger flaring, but I forced myself calm. "He wanted obedience at the cost of our lives," I said. "That is not protection, Mom. That is destruction." She shook her head, unable to hear it, sinking back into grief. I turned and left the room, my burned arm heavy at my side, my steps steady. Madison's accusations still echoed in the halls. Donna's sobs still pierced my ears, but I knew my path now. I would not let his death bury the truth. I would not let him be remembered as a man of order and strength when he had been nothing but cruelty and fear. That night, as I sat alone outside the hospital, the cool air wrapping around me, I replayed the recording. His voice low and venomous, his threats Madison's incitement, the collapse. Every sound was evidence proof that the monster was real, that his daughter had cheered him on, that his heart had failed in the act of violence. I closed my eyes, the weight of the phone in my hand, and whispered to myself, "This is only the beginning." The funeral was held 3 days later in the old church at the center of town, the one with stained glass windows that filtered sunlight into fragile patterns across the pews. The building smelled of flowers and polish, solemn and suffocating, and the pews filled quickly with neighbors, colleagues, and men Harold had once shaken hands with at town events. They came dressed in dark suits and pressed dresses, their faces heavy with sympathy, their words hushed with respect. They came because Harold Carter had built an image of reliability and strength, a man who kept his family in order and served the community with discipline. They did not know the man who pressed his daughter's arm to a stove, who struck his wife across the face, who turned his home into a prison. They only knew the mask. I sat in the front row, my back straight, my burned arm hidden beneath long sleeves, my face expressionless. Donna sat beside me, her body trembling with sobs, her face pale and streaked with tears. She clutched a tissue in one hand and a folded photograph of Harold in the other, whispering prayers under her breath. Madison sat on the other side of her, her head bowed dramatically, her cries loud and theatrical, her handkerchief pressed to her face like an actress in a play. Every few moments she glanced at the crowd, making sure they saw her grief, making sure they believed her role as the broken daughter. When the pastor spoke of Harold's devotion to family and community, I felt the words cut through me like shards of glass. Devotion, integrity, strength. Lies polished into virtue. My stomach twisted. My hands clenched, but I remained silent. This was not the place to speak. Not yet. Neighbors stepped up to share stories, voices trembling with admiration. They spoke of Harold helping repair fences, of Harold lending tools, of Harold shaking hands at town meetings. None spoke of the fear in our home, of the bruises hidden beneath sleeves, of the tears shed in locked rooms. I looked at my mother, then wondering if she would speak the truth, but she only bowed her head, her lips moving in whispered prayers. Madison rose when it was her turn. She walked to the pulpit slowly, her eyes downcast, her hand clutching the edge of the wood as though she might collapse. Her voice trembled with practiced grief. My father was the strongest man I ever knew. He taught me discipline, he taught me loyalty, he showed me what it means to protect family. He loved us more than life itself. Her voice broke, then tears spilling, and the crowd murmured their sympathy. I wanted to stand to shout the truth, but I remained seated, my jaw tight, my chest burning. When the service ended and the casket was carried down the aisle, the crowd rose in solemn silence. Donna reached out, touching the wood with trembling fingers, whispering goodbye through her tears. Madison clung to the edge, her sobs loud and dramatic, her body shaking with practiced performance. I remained still, my eyes fixed on the polished surface that hid the body of a man who had nearly destroyed us. Outside the church, the crowd gathered voices, hushed hands reaching for Donna and Madison, offering condolences, praising Harold. I stood slightly apart, my gaze scanning faces, hearing whispers. Some looked at me with pity, others with suspicion, as though they already believed Madison's words that I had somehow driven Harold to his end. I felt the weight of their stares, the judgment of a community blinded by his mask. It was then that Evelyn Brooks appeared at my side. She wore a simple black dress, her silver hair pulled back neatly, her eyes sharp and steady. She did not waste time with platitudes. She leaned closer, her voice low and firm. They do not know the truth, Claire, but I do. I heard enough. I saw enough. I will stand with you. Her words were a lifeline cutting through the noise of lies. I turned to her, my throat tight, and whispered, "Thank you." She squeezed my arm gently, her eyes unwavering. Do not let them silence you. That night, the house was filled with silence. Donna sat in Harold's chair, staring at nothing, her hands folded in her lap, her body small and frail. Madison stormed upstairs, slamming doors, her footsteps heavy with anger. I remained in the kitchen, the papers and recordings hidden in my bag, my mind racing. The funeral had shown me clearly what I already suspected. The world would remember Harold as a man of strength unless I acted. The lies would stand unless I tore them down with truth. Donna broke the silence first. Her voice was soft, trembling. He loved us in his way, Claire. You must understand that. I turned toward her, anger flaring, but I forced my voice calm. Love does not burn. Love does not strike. Love does not steal everything from the people it claims to protect. She flinched, tears spilling, her lips trembling. You cannot change the past, she whispered, but you can bury it. I shook my head, my chest tight. I will not bury it, Mom. I will expose it. Her eyes widened in fear, her body trembling. Do not, she begged. Please let it rest. But her fear no longer controlled me. I walked upstairs, each step heavy, and closed the door to my room. The papers were still safe, the recordings still intact. I spread them across the bed, scanning names, numbers, evidence of fraud and violence, proof of what he had been. Each page was heavy, each line a weapon. I thought of Evelyn's words, steady and strong. I will stand with you. I thought of my father's photograph on the dresser, his kind smile, his steady eyes. I thought of every bruise, every scream, every whispered prayer in the dark, and I knew what I had to do. Harold's funeral had been a stage play, a performance of loyalty and grief. But his true legacy was in my hands now, in the documents, in the recordings, in the scars on my skin. His mask had fooled the community, but it would not fool the law. It would not fool the truth. I sat at the desk, the lamp casting light over the papers, and whispered to myself, he is gone, but his hold dies with him. It ends now. The decision to act was no longer a question, it was a necessity. After the funeral, the silence in the house became unbearable, a silence thick with lies and shadows. Donna avoided my eyes, her grief twisted into denial, and Madison glared at me with venom whenever we crossed paths, muttering threats under her breath. But I carried more than grief, I carried proof, and proof demanded air. I contacted Ethan Ward, my childhood friend who had grown into a steady officer with a badge that carried weight. I asked him to meet me in private, and when I placed the folder of documents and the recordings on the table before him, his eyes hardened with focus. He read quietly, his jaw tightening as each page turned, as each transfer of money, each hidden report, each violent word spoken in Harold's own voice revealed the truth. When he finished, he looked up at me, his voice firm. "Claire, this is enough to open a case, but you need to be ready. Once this starts, there is no turning back." I nodded, my heart steady. I have lived under his control too long. It ends here. Ethan leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Madison will fight. Your mother may not stand with you. Are you prepared for that?" I swallowed hard, the answer clear. I am prepared. The weeks that followed unfolded like a battle campaign. Investigators combed through the files tracing Harold's transfers, uncovering the debts he had hidden, the fraud he had woven into his empire of control. Evelyn Brooks stepped forward with her testimony, her voice calm and steady as she described the screams she had heard through thin walls, the bruises she had glimpsed the nights when chaos rattled the neighborhood. Each word from her mouth strengthened the case, built a wall of truth against Harold's false image. Madison raged, her voice sharp in every hearing, her eyes blazing with hate. She denied everything, claimed I had forged documents, claimed Evelyn was lying, claimed Ethan was biased because of our past. But the evidence was relentless. The recordings of Harold's threats played in the courtroom, his voice dripping with venom, his words clear and undeniable. "Obey me, or I will break you." The phrase echoed through the room, and I watched as the community shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the image of their beloved Harold cracking with every syllable. Donna sat behind me, her face pale, her body trembling. She avoided looking at the screen, avoided listening to his voice. When the prosecutor asked her directly if she had ever seen Harold strike me, she broke into tears, her words tumbling out. "I did. I saw it. I begged him to stop, but I was too afraid." Her confession fell into the room like a stone into water, the ripples spreading wide. For the first time, she admitted what she had buried, and the weight of it seemed to collapse her shoulders. Madison shouted from her seat, calling her mother a liar, calling me a manipulator, but the judge's gavel silenced her. The evidence kept flowing, documents showing how Harold had transferred nearly everything into Madison's name, leaving Donna legally destitute. Fraud, coercion, abuse. The list grew, the case solidified. The mask of Harold Carter crumbled piece by piece until nothing remained but the truth. When the verdict came, it carried the finality of a gavel strike against stone. Harold's estate was frozen, his assets stripped from Madison, his debts exposed to the public record. Madison's inheritance dissolved, her protests loud but futile. Donna was granted the right to reclaim what was left, though it was meager compared to what had been stolen. The community, once full of sympathy, now looked at Madison with suspicion, their whispers sharp, their eyes cold. The daughter who had played the grieving victim was revealed as a willing accomplice, and the pity she craved turned into contempt. I stood in the courtroom, my hands steady, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with release. The truth had been spoken, the lies unmasked. When the judge addressed me directly, acknowledging the courage it had taken to stand, I bowed my head slightly, the weight of his words settling deep inside. "This is not just about your family, Miss Whitmore," he said. "This is about showing that no one is above consequence." Afterward, I stepped into the cool air outside, Evelyn at my side, her hand squeezing mine. "You did it," she said softly. "You gave voice to what he tried to bury." Ethan joined us, his presence calm and grounding. He nodded at me, his voice low. "You held the line, Claire, and you won." But victory was not without scars. Donna approached slowly, her face lined with grief and shame. She looked at me, her eyes red, her voice shaking. "I am sorry, Claire. I should have protected you. I should have stood up sooner." Her words were heavy, but I heard the sincerity in them. For the first time, I saw a crack in her denial, a glimpse of the woman she had once been before Harold consumed her. I placed a hand on her shoulder, my voice quiet. "You can still stand now, Mom. It is not too late." Madison, however, did not soften. She spat words like venom as she passed me, her eyes burning with hatred. You destroyed him. You destroyed everything. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. She would live with her own choices, with the truth carved into public record. Her anger no longer had power over me. The community shifted slowly, whispers turning into conversations, neighbors who had once praised Harold now questioning how they had been so blind. Some approached me with apologies, awkward but earnest, others simply nodded from a distance, their eyes filled with regret. The town itself had been fooled, and now it too was forced to face consequence. In the quiet after the storm, I felt the weight lift, not fully, but enough to breathe. Harold was gone, his mask torn away, his empire dismantled. Madison's cruelty had been exposed. Donna's silence broken Evelyn's courage, honored. The scars remained the memories raw, but truth had prevailed. As I walked home that evening, the sun setting behind the church spire, I thought of my father, the man who had raised me before Harold came. I thought of the promises I had made to myself when I put on the uniform to protect, to endure, to fight when necessary, and I realized I had fulfilled them not on foreign soil, but here in the house where I had been broken and rebuilt. Justice was not clean, it was not easy, but it was real. And for the first time in years, I believed the future could be built on something stronger than fear. The house felt different after the trial, stripped of the presence that had dominated every corner, yet also heavy with memories that clung to the walls like shadows. I walked through each room slowly, my hand brushing over the furniture, the windows, the door frames that had witnessed years of fear. In the silence, I could hear echoes of his voice, commands that once froze us in place, and I felt the weight of how deeply control had seeped into our lives. But beneath that weight, there was something new, something fragile but undeniable. Freedom. Donna moved quietly through the house, her steps hesitant, her eyes lowered. She had begun therapy with a counselor recommended by Ethan, and though the process was slow, there were signs of change. She no longer flinched when doors slammed, no longer avoided mirrors. Sometimes she would look at me with tears in her eyes, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Madison had left town shortly after the verdict, her pride shattered, her inheritance gone. I did not know where she went, and part of me did not care. She had chosen Harold's shadow, and now she would live with the darkness it carried. I remained in the house for a few weeks, sorting through papers, repairing broken locks, repainting walls. Each act felt like reclaiming space, like pulling out weeds that had long choked the garden. But I knew I could not stay forever. The house would always carry his mark, and my future needed to be built somewhere else. One morning, I rose before dawn, laced my boots, and stepped outside into the cool air. The sky was painted with the first hints of light, the horizon glowing faintly. I began to run, my breath steady, my feet pounding against the road. With each step, I felt the weight of the past loosening my body, shedding the chains I had carried for years. I thought of the drills I had done in uniform, the endless marches, the commands shouted by instructors. But this run was mine. No one controlled my pace. No one ordered my stride. The only voice in my head was my own, strong and clear. In the weeks that followed, I founded a small organization with the support of Ethan and Evelyn, dedicated to helping women and veterans who had endured violence in their homes. We started with a few meetings in the community center, a handful of survivors sharing their stories. But word spread, and soon more came, faces etched with pain, but also with hope. We built a network of support, raising funds, offering resources, creating a safe place where truth was not silenced. Each person who walked through the doors reminded me why I had survived, why I had chosen to fight. At night, I often sat on the porch with Evelyn, sipping tea, watching the stars emerge one by one. She would tell me stories of her own battles, the years she had endured under a man who claimed to love her but crushed her spirit. Her strength gave me perspective, her presence gave me comfort. We were two women from different generations, bound by scars, but also by resilience. Donna attended some of the meetings, quietly sitting in the back, listening. She rarely spoke, but I saw the way her eyes followed the stories, the way her shoulders straightened a little more each time. Healing was not quick, and forgiveness was complicated, but I believed she was finding her way out of Harold's shadow too. The past did not vanish. The burn on my arm healed into a scar, a reminder etched into skin of the night he tried to brand me. The memories of his words still surfaced when the house was too quiet, when shadows grew too long. But the scar was not shame. It was proof. Proof that I had endured, proof that I had survived, proof that he had not won. One evening, I visited the cemetery where he was buried. The grave was marked with polished stone, his name etched cleanly, his years of life listed as though they told the whole story. Flowers lay at the base left by those who still believed the mask. I stood there for a long time, the wind stirring through the trees, the world quiet around me. Finally, I spoke softly, not to honor him, but to close the chapter. You tried to break me, Harold. You failed. Your truth is known, and your hold is gone. I turned and walked away, leaving the stone behind me, not as a monument, but as a warning. The future stretched out uncertain but wide. I thought often of my father, the man who had given me my name and my strength before Harold ever entered our lives. I thought of the soldier I had become, of the battles fought overseas and the battle fought here at home. And I realized the greatest victory was not in survival alone, but in transforming pain into purpose. The house would be sold eventually, the proceeds used to fund the foundation we had built. I planned to move closer to the city where resources were stronger, where the network could grow. But no matter where I went, the lessons would remain. Fear thrives in silence, but truth has power. Control crumbles under exposure, and even the most careful mask cannot survive the weight of evidence. As dawn broke one morning, I laced my boots again and ran down the familiar road the horizon painted gold. My lungs burned, my muscles ached, but my spirit felt light. Each step carried me further from the darkness, further toward a future built not on obedience, but on choice. I ran until the sun rose fully, until the world around me glowed with possibility, until I could feel my heart steady and strong inside my chest. The war in my home was over, but the fight for truth and justice would continue, and I was ready. Not as a victim, not as a soldier, but as Claire Whitmore, a woman who had faced the fire and emerged with scars that told not of defeat, but of survival. You have walked with me through the shadows of my home, through the fire that scarred my skin, through the courtrooms that stripped away lies, and through the dawn that promised renewal. But stories like mine are not only about the past, they are also about what comes next, about the choices we make when the mask of silence is finally broken. I share this not because I want pity or applause, but because I know I am not the only one who has lived in a house where fear was louder than laughter, where obedience was demanded instead of love, and where silence felt safer than truth. Maybe you have known someone like Harold, someone who controlled with words sharper than knives, someone who smiled in public and struck in private. Maybe you have sat at a dinner table where one person's voice drowned out everyone else, where you learned to measure every word because the wrong sentence would unleash rage. Maybe you have been told to stay quiet, to keep the peace, to protect the family's image, even as your heart shattered under the weight of secrets. If so, then you already know the truth of my story, because in some way it is yours too. I want to speak directly to those who carry scars, whether on the skin or deep inside where no one can see them. You may think you are alone. You may think no one would believe you. You may think that silence is safer. I thought those things too. But silence only feeds the power of those who harm. Silence gives them room to grow stronger. The moment truth is spoken, the mask cracks. The moment evidence is shown, the lies unravel. The moment one voice refuses to be quiet, others will rise and join. I know some of you listening are older, with years behind you filled with choices you wish had gone differently. Some of you stayed in homes where love was confused with control, where your children grew up watching cycles of fear and obedience. Some of you carry guilt for not leaving sooner, for not protecting sooner. I want you to hear me clearly. It is never too late. Healing does not have an expiration date. You are not defined by the harm done to you or by the mistakes made in fear. You are defined by what you choose now. And to those who have never lived it, who may only know of stories like mine through whispers or headlines, I ask you to listen with open hearts. Do not dismiss the signs when you hear shouts through thin walls, when you see bruises that do not match explanations, when you notice someone's spirit shrinking little by little. Do not look away. Do not assume it is none of your business, because silence from bystanders is the soil in which abusers thrive. Evelyn Brooks. My neighbor proved that even a quiet voice from the outside can change everything. Her courage gave me strength, and your courage can do the same for someone in your life. This channel is not just about stories, it is about connection. Every time you share where you are watching from, every time you comment with your thoughts, you are part of a community that refuses silence. You may be in a small town where everyone knows everyone, or in a big city where neighbors pass like strangers. But here in this space, we are connected by the truth that no life deserves to be ruled by fear. When I stood in that courtroom and watched the community hear Harold's voice, hear his threats, see his fraud exposed, I realized justice is not just about punishment. It is about revelation. It is about lifting the veil so others can finally see clearly. That is what stories do. They reveal, they remind, they warn, they heal. And that is why I keep telling mine. I want you to think about your own journey. What scars do you carry? What truths have you hidden? What moments of silence still haunt you? Write them down if you must. Share them if you are ready. Or simply whisper them to yourself and admit they exist, because acknowledgement is the first step toward freedom. I know many of you watching are in your 50s, 60s, even 70s. You may wonder what good it does to dig up the past now. But the truth is that every step toward healing matters no matter when it happens. Some of you are grandparents watching the next generation grow. Think of the gift you give them when you show that silence is not the answer, when you prove that courage is possible, even late in life. Think of the strength they will inherit from seeing you stand tall. And for those who have never spoken, who sit quietly with pain that has lasted decades, I want to tell you this. Your story matters. It matters not only to you, but to others who need to hear that survival is possible, that healing is possible, that justice in some form can still come. The shape of justice may differ, but its impact is the same. It restores dignity. It breaks cycles. It gives light where there was only shadow. So I ask you, do not let my story end with me. Carry it with you. Share it with someone who needs courage. Reflect on it when you see silence closing around a friend or a neighbor. Remember that behind closed doors, many battles are fought in secret, and your willingness to notice could be the difference between despair and hope. I survived because I refused to break, because I held the line, because I chose truth. But survival alone is not enough. Survival must grow into purpose. That is why I built a foundation, why I continue to speak, why I run at dawn with the rising sun, reminding me that every day is a chance to rebuild. And that is why I am here now, asking you to reflect, to connect, to share. This channel thrives not on numbers, but on voices. Your voice matters. Your reflections matter. When you comment, you are not only speaking to me, you are speaking to someone else who may be sitting in silence right now, wondering if they have the strength to go on. Your words could be the spark they need. So I invite you to do more than listen. Be part of the conversation. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me what part of my story struck you most. Tell me if you see yourself in the shadows I described. And if you cannot share publicly, take a moment to whisper it to yourself, because recognition is the seed of change. Life after Harold is not simple. There are still nights when I wake to the echo of his voice, still mornings when the scar on my arm aches with memory. But I do not carry those moments alone anymore. I carry them into light, into truth, into community. And you can too. Remember, this silence is the soil where cruelty grows. But truth is the blade that cuts through its roots. Choose truth. Choose voice. Choose courage. And know that in doing so, you are never alone.